Bafundi, today I am doing quite an extreme alteration for this gentleman. To be very honest, I'm completely shocked that the salesman sold him this suit. It is enormously too big for him. There's no chance that this should have been a sale. For, we're taking out of this back 7 centimeters. It's wow. Anyway, so that's a whole nother story. But together we're just going to go step by step over how we're going to handle this alteration, looking at some challenging areas here and there, and of course looking at how we're going to mitigate all of that. So let me start by finding an unpicker. Right. First of all, obviously, unpicking. Now, we are quite lucky here. This waistband is just tacked down here and there, so we can just grab that. So, a big problem that we're going to face here is that the more you take out of the center back, the more the pockets tend to migrate from the side onto the bums. And the more that happens, the more they end up flaring and creating like quite a bulge. So we are just going to deal with that a little bit. Also, because it's so big, that part under the bums, that's like nice and baggy and looking like a full nappy. The crotch isn't too bad, but we are going to take the opportunity to just tighten that up a little bit. So, okay, there we have. Waistband open at the back. Let's see, where all did we stitch? All right. Just opening this all up. Nothing too exciting. I am opening this like more or less to the pocket, because that's as much undoing as we're going to need to do. Okay, so that's undone. Hems have not been done. If this had been done, obviously I would have been checking the measures of the hem to decide either unpick or just cut. What we're also going to do here is, like I say, deal with that bagginess under the bum and also tightening up the crotch. Now the crotch, you can't, if it's too low, you can't actually lift it higher. What you can do is tighten it, which is a bit of a gamble because that can then cause you to rip your trousers if it's too tight there. Okay, so may as well just open this, get this little piece out of the way. Okay, and then here, opening up just a bit of the crotch. Now there is a chain stitch there, so that is exactly what we're going to exploit. Okay. All right, and then here, I'm opening up about 11 centimeters. And hopefully this is also chain stitch. Amazing. So I'm going to unpick right here. Okay, so of course the most important thing to do before I start anything is going to be to iron all these seams flat, which I will do in a minute. Just one thing I want to look at is how the pockets are done, because we are taking it in on the side. We are giving this a bit of a taper. And we do want to start actually a little bit above the pocket, which I generally don't like to do. It is just, of course, because this is so enormously huge. I'm really, like the shirt. The shirt, I think we took out 20 centimeters. Okay, so I won't let you stay around for the other side. Obviously, I'll just unpick that one. So this pocket is very easy. We can actually just close that seam and just stitch it there. We are going to close a little bit of the pocket. So that's easy peasy. If the bag is done over that seam, then of course you have to unpick a bit of the bag just to get on the inside there. But this one, nice and easy. So I'm going to unpick, you see here, this is the leg. And I've just unpicked a little portion of the crotch there, or the inside leg from the crotch to probably around 15 centimeters. I'm going to do that on the other leg, and then I'm just going to iron all of my seams nice and flat. And then we'll look at how we adjust everything from there. So I'm going to do the sides of the legs first. That way I can do the center back seam all the way to the crotch one time. So let's see, our hem is less 13 centimeters. Let me just see if I have another chalk. This one pisses me off. Yeah, this is one. Right, so hem, less 13. I always leave a 5 centimeter turn up. That's going to be less 8, or let's say cut 8. Now this method of mine, it does leave a corner, but we're going to taper anyway. So pins. And I can always triple check. Hem less 13 means cut 8. And that leaves me with a 5 centimeter turn up. Fashion baby. And of course cutting about a quarter of a centimeter. Just going to bring that down. Actually measuring from the bottom part of the zigzag. Or I can say the lowest part of the zigzag. Let's cut that, maybe 2 mils. Hey, what have they put in the seam? My goodness, imagine. Sure. All right. Let me just do the other leg while I'm at it. Let's see. Yeah, this is just one of those things you've got to do. Where are we now? Yeah, cut 8, measuring from the bottom of the zigzag. I think if the seam was still open, this would be a little bit easier. It's just that both seams are lying in the same direction, which I think is happening again. So we have quite a few layers there. Now, usually, I first check whether these legs are the same length before I do this. Sometimes I forget, and then I just do it afterwards. Because at least, that 5 centimeter turn up is very helpful. And of course, cutting a quarter centimeter longer. Let me just grab this. This is the client. So I did check the length of the legs, and they are super fab. So let's carry on with doing the side alteration. So here I'm just following the measures that I did from the pinning. Also, I do always chat to the client and say, look, first of all, that sales assistant, wow. Secondly, the more we take from the center back, the more your pockets are going to flare, so prepare emotionally. Because it was so wide here on the hips, we are going to be closing that pocket a little bit, actually sewing here down a little bit, about half a centimeter. We're taking this pocket in. So it won't make the pocket so small. So this is a ginormous size. So the pocket was actually rather large for this gentleman. So it's not going to be such a drama. But I always just make sure I communicate this with the client so that they know what is going on, what to expect. They don't want to all of a sudden have their pockets smaller and then be like, hey, how did that happen? I don't know. In any event, here down at the bottom, of course, we don't want to taper into a corner. We do want to have it more or less straight here at the bottom. And I'm now using a new machine for the hem, which is fabulous because that is saving me years of my life. But this machine, the hem has to fold up exact. You can't lock that little gap into the crease at the front and the back like you can do by hand. So where I can, I'll then just redo the hem here so that when this folds back, it's going to match exactly and not cause that little bit of a inside hem being smaller than the outside of the leg, which, like I say, not a drama if you're doing it by hand because you just lock that little gap into the crease. But like I say, the machine can already handle it. So, okay, there we are. So we're cutting a little bit of that pocket out. I'm just putting a pin here and there just to help the fabric not shift around. And of course, I don't have to redo all of those measurements one by one. I can just flip this over, line it up, and then just grab those marks. So yeah, that's where we start. We've got half a centimeter in the pocket. We remain at half a centimeter all the way down. So we just do a few little marks around there. Down here we get to 3/4 centimeters, and then the hem, it's 3/4 centimeters. So it's not all that much that we're taking out. So surprisingly, the legs were quite skinny anyways. It's really that waist, wow. But of course, this is why we are in business, because clothes from the rack do not like to fit your unique body. So, all right, so that's the outside leg done. That is pretty easy peasy. Now we're going to go to the inside leg, which is a little bit more complex. Okay, so let's look at the crotch. So, as you know, you cannot really raise the crotch because you can't add more fabric here. You could raise it maybe half a centimeter from the stitch line up to into the seam allowance, but that's really not worth the drama. You can make it tighter by taking the seam allowance in here. A little bit of a balance, because of course you can't go so far because we have to have this curve. So you can't, for example, go up to there. It wouldn't really work with the fly that's over here. And it does make it then tighter so that every time you step, there's a little bit of tension on that seam. A little bit of a gamble. Also, depending on how it's made, you can see this one. The back is at this angle. So if we make it tighter here, we're actually making the crotch lower. So much drama to deal with. What we're going to do here, also, it does, if we just take it in there, it can reduce some of the bulk here on the bums, depending what you're doing. In this case, we're actually going to shift the back piece sideways like that to actually reduce some of this bulk here on the bum. So, more like there, just under the bums. So we do want to, if possible, move it a full 2 centimeters. Now, of course, that is stitch line to stitch line, but if you just use your maths, it's also seam allowance to seam allowance. You don't have to struggle to match the stitch lines. Now, of course, as I'm coming back here, seam is going down. So if I match that, you see it creates this little bubble. Now, some of that we can just shrink away, but I'm going to just mismatch it like maybe about so, and just see, we're just going to gather that in. Obviously, the more you unpick here, the easier it's going to be for you to gather that little bit of excess. So yeah, it looks like 2 centimeters is going to be fine. I find that is more or less the max that you can go before it starts really warping the garment. And then kind of smoothing that back into 0 at about 15 centimeters usually. 10 to 15 centimeters, somewhere there. So they're just going to pull that portion of the trouser in, like under, in toward the bums, so that you don't have that sagginess right under the bum. And at that point, so we've got here, we're actually going to keep that at 0. At 11, we're going to have half a centimeter. So of course that's in addition to this little excess that we're putting out there. And then we go all the way down, just stay at half a centimeter, all the way down to 15, half a centimeter, half a centimeter. We just keep going. We get down here, we've got 10, becomes 0.75, and the hem, which is 5 centimeters, is 0.75. So you can see here how I've cut the hem. It does end up not being straight there. It's straight like that. There you go. But then when you flatten it out, it's not straight there. I don't know if there is really a solution to that. I'll just give it some thought and maybe I cut it straight like this. I don't know. Anyways, for now, it works. I'm going to just keep going with that. And again, just putting an angle on the hem there. Bring this up. Okay, so that is manipulating the bum portion and the crotch. Depending, because this crotch, like I said, it's not actually so low, so we don't really need to pull it up. It's just that bagginess under the bum that we're addressing. If the crotch is also low, then of course we can address that by making it tighter here with another centimeter. So then we take the back out 3 centimeters, the front out 1 centimeters, or whatever is the relation. But again, of course, the more we take in here, the more mismatched. I hope you can see that. The more mismatched those seams get, the lower the crotch actually gets. Tighter the crotch gets, not tighter as in higher, tighter as in like tighter on the inner thigh. And the more prone it is to rip. So the only interesting thing I can say here is that, of course, this side we're going to have this portion up, so you're going to have to stitch on this side. So this you'll actually stitch bottom up, which is not always great. You want to stitch top down, but sometimes for fashion, you do these things. So yeah, I'm just going to mark all of that up and go and stitch it. Nothing too exciting right over there. So that's all done. Just maybe a comment here, maybe 2. Wherever you're coming in from 0, from the original stitch, I like to just have a decent amount of back stitch there, especially like this as a chain stitch. So I can unravel very easily. And then also just this portion here by the pocket bag, from the top to the pocket bag, I always do twice, because here, where this pocket's now connected, this gets a lot of action, in out the whole day. So this portion here, I want to be quite stable. So I always just do that twice. And then from there, we are going to do that very fun thing called unpicking. Now, fortunately, we are very, very lucky. Okay, this is now navy on, or black on navy, which is not the luckiest color to be unpicking. But it is a chain stitch, amazing. So I can just unpick all of that. I won't put you through this, other than to say that, of course, here, the seam allowance, now what's the result? Maybe 2 centimeters, like 175. It's really not worth trimming that down. we leave it open to around 2 centimeters. More than 2 centimeters, we tend to cut it, depending. We'll always leave as much seam allowance as possible. But yeah, I'm just going to unpick all of that and then iron it again, open. Of course, here, had this been another story with the pocket, we would just be doing that however it needs to be, usually open anyways, with just the pocket piece coming the side. It really depends on the actual trousers. This one, easy peasy. I'm just opening that, ironing it flat. Good deal there. Yeah, there we are. Nothing too exciting. That's all ironed open. Here on the crotch, I'm not going to trim that down. I'm going to leave it exactly like that. Depending how I feel on the day, sometimes I'll fold that back. But I really, like that just creates more bulk actually. So we can now look at doing the crotch. So one time, center back and crotch in one. So I'm just going to put these legs into each other so that we've got this sitting out like that. So it's one easy seam like so, with those two legs just in there. So yeah, this is quite a hectic one. And depending on how it goes with the client, let's just look at these bolt loops. Yeah, 3.5, at the end of the day, they're just going to put the bolt loops like that together, which it's just not fashion. So let's actually first just move those bolt loops before we carry on anything from there. So I'm going to move these bolt loops out, and then of course I'm going to overlock the hems so that we can then stitch them up, 5 centimeters of turn up. Whenever I'm doing a bar tack, I try and do it from the back like that, because like this, you can easily damage the fabric. And then so much therapy. So I'll first start with the back, just to kind of loosen up those threads. Okay, so let's see. At the moment, these loops are about 10 centimeters apart. So if we move this 3.5, we want that another 5 centimeters, so we want it about there. So from there should be 13, what? No, yeah, 8.5. So yeah, we put it at, let's be accurate, let's do 8.5 from the center. So we can just unpick just that little portion. No need to make our lives harder than they already are. No need to do more work than we already are doing. So yeah, check that out. And we're going to put it in there, for which I need to just open a little bit more. It depends. If the bolt loops are going to be maybe 5 centimeters apart, I won't be too fast. But yeah, like here where the bolt loops end up being on top of each other, that's really not fashion. Just open that little piece. Zoe this right in there. Going generally, it will match up with that seam allowance. It will match up with that seam allowance there. We'll be obliged with that one. So let's just align that, make sure everything is flat. It is straight on the side. Yeah, and then I'm just going to stitch one time. Whoop. Obviously, I'm doing the same on that side. Right, so bolt loops have been moved. Let's get back to the story. I did also overlock the hems there, so let's get these legs back inside each other like that. Right, there they are. Here we are on the back seam. Okay, so this, if I look at it, already looks quite skew. If I look at the seam allowance there, let's say 3.5. Here at the top, no, just touching 4. Now, usually this part of the band is 1,000% straight. I don't like to replicate an error. Oh, wow. Not only was this whole suit not great quality, but really, really the wrong size for this gentleman. But I think I'm going to, I'm taking it in 3.5, and I'm going to just with my eyes straighten that. So at the bottom here, it gets to like maybe 3.75. It's not a lot. It's just going to make that band 100% straight. And I want that 100% straight all the way there. Now, when you are fitting the client and putting these pins, sometimes, especially like around here, right underneath the bum, like I can't physically get underneath there to put a pin without maybe offering another surface as a piercer. So, after maybe about this level, you really can't be pinning this. So what I'm trying to say is that the notes that I take are really, they kind of stop over here. So anyway, I've got 3.5 there. I want to be straight for a little bit underneath the belt loop. Otherwise, I'm going to have a weird corner there. Get down to 2.5, then to 2. And here I have to really use my discretion. Now, judging from what I saw with the client, I kind of, in a way, want to shift this backwards. So maybe let's look at an illustration. This is the costume at the moment. I want to shift everything backwards. So we just want to come back like that, in a way. So I can, with my eyes, kind of bring it in like so. Here we go. And then, obviously, pinning. Here, we want to make sure that our waistband is matching. So I want to pin through those stitches and make sure that I've got it exactly like that on the other side. Now here, the top of the waistband and the bottom of the skirt on the inside, not super important that they match, but it would be nice. So you can just, on that stitching, let's see what are our measures here. So the waistband is then 5 centimeters tall. No, it's 4 centimeters. Okay, so it folds there. There's 4 centimeters. So then here on the bottom, I'm going to just stitch to 4.5 and just leave that little portion. It just helps a little bit with, when you fold this over, that it actually sits nicely. Just going to put 1 or 2 pins here to keep this all in place. Then I'll go stitch this up. What I'm going to do, I'm first just going to stitch a small portion here, and then check that this hasn't shifted. If I'm happy with that, then I stitch the whole thing one time, straight stitch. I'll go all the way. Here, I'm going to leave that up like that. And you see here, I should pin that. Because of this mismatch, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to stitch as close as I can to this edge of the fabric, and then join into that seam allowance there, or join into that previous stitch line there, like that. So kind of being as close to the top as I can here. There we go. Stitch that one time, and then come over it with a very narrow zigzag, because that is going to give me just a little bit of elasticity because of the zigzag stitch, and that is going to help this seam not to rip. If there's tension put on it, it's going to give a little bit rather than goop. So let's do that. I suppose, one time I could do the hems, but because the legs are inside each other now, I'll rather just do that separate. There we have it. The center back's done. Now looking at it like this, This does not look straight to me, but at least it's just the under portion that's extra that I can handle. This portion I want to be straight. This portion that's going to be the visible waistband. Now, let's see, so many things to think about. I've unpicked this original stitch, and here on the crotch, sometimes the original can be underneath the new one, or like visible on the outside. So just check it here. It's tough to really tell, but you just don't want it to be sticking out there. I think that's all fine. Like the new stitch is really grabbed onto. You see, there's the new stitch. There's the old stitch. Yeah, it's just that little portion there. It needs to be. Here we go. Just liberated there a little bit. Now here, this is too much excess. If you fold this open, this you can get away with here at the top. You just must not force this to be straight there, because then it's going to pull your bum funny here. But this portion here by the bottom of the bums, of course, yeah, let's see, there we go. There's too much seam allowance to really be comfortable. This is going to crawl up into your crack. Not going to be fun. So we're going to trim that down a little bit. Let's put these legs in again. Okay, and up here, it really kind of depends how you feel in your life. But around 4 centimeters is fine, 4 to 5. Since we're cutting, we can now decide. Usually I'll just leave it as the original. Just want to open up this little section. Right. So up here, 4 or 5. 4 is going to be fine, so I'm just going to cut that. 4, 4, 4 is okay. Here at the bottom, you really want about 1.5. So I'm actually just going to measure that with my eyes and see, like here on this curve here, you really can't have more than 1.5. 1.5 is your max. So let's kill that. And of course, I'll just now overlock this and then iron it open. So that's not too exciting. Up here, this portion, when I iron that open, I can just put that as a triangle. You can stitch it like that, like the original chaps did. I don't usually bother. I usually just turn that, and then, when I stitch it down here, it'll automatically just catch that. Now here, we've unpicked a little bit here, so I'm just going to redo just a bit of that, just to make sure I catch that back there. It kind of depends how much of a rush I'm in, because you can also just understitch that, stitch in the ditch, and that will then catch this. It will come through to this. So it kind of depends how you're feeling emotionally. I'm probably going to do that, to be honest. It's a Saturday. I have limits. So ironing or overlocking, ironing. Maybe at this stage I'll do the legs, the hems, on my new Fash blind hem machine, Image. Right. There we are, Bafundi. Finished overlocking that, ironed it out flat, turned in those triangles, and now I've put a pin right through the seam, just so that I keep that in the center. Now looking at this and what I unpicked here, I can go, if I go from the seam of this dart here, I'm going to put the pin just a little bit before that. I'm just going to stitch in the ditch all the way through the layers. It's just going to become fashion all the way to that seam of the dart here above the pocket. So I'll stitch it like this, and then I'll be able to come in here, secure that belt loop, and then secure it up there. I don't bother doing this with a zigzag. I'm just going to use a straight. No one will die. And of course, I took the opportunity to finish my hems. Look at that. Hold 2 seconds of around with the blind stitch. And I did take the opportunity to put this crotch guard back into place, just some like here and there, sorting that. So yeah, once that is done, this whole thing is done, except for one little tiny thing which we're going to do in a second. Bafundi, that is all done. There it is. There's my, this is like some sticky white, I think it's like from a tag. Anyway, I'm getting rid of that. There it all is. I'm just going to give that one last iron, sort that out. Legs are done, everything's done. Bum is now nicely tight. But as we were saying, the more we take in the center back, the more these pockets migrate to the back. The more that happens, the more they tend to bulge out here on the side. So when you see it kind of bulges out like that, very unfashionable. So what we're going to do, just to mitigate that, is a bit of hand stitching, just a bit of a gather stitch. So I'm going to start right from the inside, having my knot there, because that's going to secure it nicely. Let's make sure I don't do some weird chacharacha nonsense with the seam allowance. Just going to come in here. And I'm going to do this. Okay, there we go, that's fine. I'm going to do this right next door to the top stitch that they've got here. You see they've got a top stitch. I hope you can see that. It's navy blue. This is menswear. Don't kill me. But anyway, I'm going to do this kind of just next to it on the edge closest to the opening of the pocket. And I'm just going to hand stitch and then do a tiny little back stitch and just give that a bit of a tug. Tiny little back stitch, give that a bit of a tug. So now, of course, if we've been practicing our hand stitch, we know we go from the lock position, looking like that. We stitch our stitch. We push that through, we grab with our forefinger and thumb, pull it out, and then we've got our pinky here to regulate our tension because we don't want to overpull, except in this case where you want to overpull a little bit. So in this case, when I stitch, I like to then kind of grab it like that, and see here, I've just twisted, so I'm actually pulling it with my index finger. But then immediately back to the lock position. So here you see, pull that with my index like so, and then same story back to the lock. And I'm just going to carry on with that. The last thing I'll do here is, of course, pray that I haven't left any random loops anywhere. Will be to just iron this so that it's not so obvious that I've got a gather stitch on the edge of the pocket. And that will just help the pocket to lie flat, even though it is wanting to bulge. That little secret will just be between you and me. So yeah, let me finish that off. I'll give it an iron, and then it's clear dealer. I can actually enjoy the rest of my weekend. Except I am seeing a client tomorrow, but he's just quickly dropping off. You know, for fashion, I do anything.